Everyone, and welcome to Theola Gaming. With me here tonight we have Adam
Evening, folks.
and Jacob
Today,
and Joel.
Something purple bird meme.
You and your memes. I don't even know any.
I don't either.
You guys haven't seen the purple bird meme? Like this stupid pigeon thing that keeps swinging its neck back and forth like it's gonna fall off.
I saw that when you
I have
posted in our group
not.
chat.
Yeah, like if you haven't seen it yet, you're gonna be seeing a lot of it in the next few days. It is the new haram.
And that's why we're here tonight, to discuss the purple bird meme?
And
I
that's
was
the
just
memorial of
being
Harambe.
topical with my hello. Like we can move on to a serious topic. I just wanted to show that we are actually like date with the latest social trends or something.
That
It's
can't
all
be
about
true.
niche
We're
crafting, you
Christian.
guys. Make people think that we're more switched on than we are.
We're the most
What?
switched on.
What is that? The beacon formed to the ways of this old, isn't it? Yeah, that's how it goes. Beacon
that's
formed.
not Romans 12, mate. That is not Romans 12.
Mate, I believe that is what I may have left off a couple of words at the beginning, but I don't know were important to the context.
Anyway,
So tonight we are discussing the Royal Commission and the recent findings from that. Just how prevalent the abuse was and how covered up it was. Which
And I
reminds me
guess...
that I haven't got those numbers on hand.
No, and I also feel you should clarify what particular Royal
Oh, yeah.
Commission we're talking about for international
The
audiences.
Australian Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse within the churches. Is it specifically churches? I'm not sure it is.
No, institutional. So any churches have come under a lot of scrutiny
schools?
for it. Because
The schools, maybe?
I'm not sure about. There's been a big focus on the churches because that's where it's sort of been coming to light, and they're the ones that have been getting all the attention too, particularly the Catholics. Because the thing with the Catholic Church is, the Pope is Jesus on earth, and they're the only, salvation comes through participation in the church, and so the church is the institution you can trust, and it's the way that you get God's grace. So when the church screws up and screws up on a scale like they've, up until now, people have gone, their moral authority, we need to look up to them, we need to respect them. And then it comes out that they haven't been conducting themselves in anything close to the way they said they were. People get a little bit annoyed. Just a little bit.
Which is kind of ironic how much people covered that up, and yet how willing they are at the moment to call out their Pope on potential heresy on changing communion.
He's obviously not an infallible pope, though, so something's wrong, right? If he was a good pope, then he would be making infallible choices, but his choices are clearly fallible, so we'll call him out until we get a problem. Right?
Wow.
That's how it works.
Wow.
Alright, so that was side topic. But basically, there was a lot of abuse found among, I think the news was among priests or like religious members, because it had not convents, the male equivalent, monasteries. Not,
Excuse me.
it's not really that either.
Sorry.
It's like
Brotherhood,
whatever. It doesn't matter.
sort of?
It was mostly those sort of like religious boarding schools. Had a lot of them. Like one of them had about a 40 to 50% abuse rate by the priests, and even more knew about it and did nothing, which is appalling.
So you've got to protect the reputation of the church. You've got to keep people thinking they can trust them and look to them for moral guidance. Image crafting, guys, come on. That's what it's about. They're actually taking care of people. It's about taking care of yourself. Maybe I'm just too cynical, but But honestly, it's the scale of things that have come out. It's just ridiculous. Like this idea of it averaging out to like 7% of all ministers in the Catholic Church being child abusers. Like that's a
That's a
phenomenal
lot.
statistic. As in, I'd always been under the impression, as in, there's certain subset of jobs, things like ministers, things like teachers, that sort of thing, that attract people who want to interfere with kids. So these professions have a higher than average rate of child abuse by people. But usually, from what I've read, as I looked into it a while back, it's about 1%. And so I've been under the impression that, okay, yeah, the church has an abuse problem, but it's no worse than other similar sort of vocations. It's around that 1% mark. But no, it comes out 7%. So like these professions that already attract more kitty fiddlers than usual, like teachers or whatever, 1% of all teachers interfere with kids. 7% of all Catholic priests is 7 times more likely than an already, high rate of pedophiles. How the flip does that happen? And no one sort of go, oh, something bad is going on here. We should do something about that. Like it's just absolutely, I can't fathom how, you know, how someone didn't stop sooner and go, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Everyone just seemed to get on board with like, oh, we've got to protect our image. We'll cover this up. We'll sweep it under the rug. And no one sort of paused to think, we're doing a lot of sweeping under the rug. Maybe we should actually take stock of what's going on here.
So do we know what it was like leading up to the Royal Commission beginning to investigate things? Like what precipitated, were there any big leaks or anything that precipitated the Royal Commission happening? Or was it just kind of things reach critical mass?
A lot of the stuff in particular seems to have been cases from like the I'm not sure what the more recent ones are, but a lot of it is sort of like 20 years ago and more 30 years ago and more. So this is older stuff. As we get closer to the present, like people have done a better job of really implementing stuff to make sure that don't get away with nearly as much. But there'd been an increasing number of people sort of coming forward saying, look, I was molested, I was interfered with, Eventually, the people started going, seeing a lot of these cases coming out, we should have a royal commission to find out what's actually going on. And so there was people agitating for that for quite an amount of time before that actually became a thing that eventuated. So that's been going on for, I think, is it 4 years now out of a total of 7?
The commission?
Yeah.
2013 to present by the looks of it.
Yep. 4 years.
13th of January.
Yep. So people had been pushing for that for years before it happened. Pushing for it in response. Hey, we're seeing more and more of these abuse claims coming forward. There's a real problem here that the church needs to be held accountable for. Doubt. Case.
I had no idea that Scouts Australia was one of the bodies investigated by the commission. Which
it's
I
not
suppose...
surprising. Again, it's one of these sort of groups
exactly.
that attract that type of person.
And depending, I guess it's often hard to get leaders as well, so...
It was pretty much everyone, I think, any institution that has anything to do with kids.
Yeah.
And it hit a lot of them hard. Like, I have heard stuff about teachers before, a couple of years back. And I think Scouts was on the news as well, just seeing how prevalent abuse was in some of these areas.
But again, this of the abuse in these situations, haven't heard it being unusually high. The fact that it's there to begin with is shocking, and the fact that people have covered it up is shocking, but we've known about that for ages. What we didn't know about was with the Catholic Church in particular, 7 times higher than normal sort of rates of abuse. Not to downplay the seriousness of the case in the Scout situation and in teachers. Those are obviously shocking things, but it's sort of like the scale of it happening in the, it's almost 1 in 10. You put 15, or fewer priests in a room and pick which one of these guys has interfered with kids. Dang.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I think obviously there's heaps of different things to be disappointed about. One, it's occurring at all. Okay. The other thing is just the cover up. Really means it's not just 1 in 12, 1 in 13 that's, guilty of seriously messing up, but many more that help cover or facilitating covering it. And of course, none of that, what they're doing is biblical.
Yeah, that's probably
Like,
the saddest.
abuse is completely non-biblical.
It's probably the saddest thing to me is the role of a priest or of a teacher, shepherd, deacon, overseer, whatever word you want to use, is held to a much higher standard than anything else. Now judgment will be much higher. I am training to be a priest, that's why I said our. But anyway, and not a priest, pastor, whatever. Most people don't know the difference. I barely know the difference.
Something interesting is each year they publish the 100 most trusted and least trusted, like, professions, and religious, what's a religious clergy or something, was something like in the 70s or 80s. So one is being the most trusted, 100 being the least trusted, and I think it was around lawyer and used car salesman or something. It was around what it was, and it's just been dropping. It, like, particularly from at least 10 years ago. I remember just reading it each year, even in school, just curiously because it was in the Sunday Mail. But yeah, this has pretty much been one of the main contributors to is the abuse. Which is a shame because part of their job is to be trusted.
And their job is, as overseer, as one to look out across the congregation to protect and care for and shepherd those that are there, not to do what most of them are doing in either abusing kids or almost even worse is those who, when they knew
Yeah.
someone else was abusing them, just shuttled them off to some other church in the middle of nowhere where people are even more vulnerable and they were just allowed to keep going. I mean, I take a bit of comfort in the fact that God is not going to let them go lightly when the time comes, especially given the position they were trusted with.
Well,
So
that's
what
an important
happens to
thing,
someone who
theologically
does that?
speaking, is that, just because they may seem to be justified on earth in their own religious-ish way, that doesn't mean anything in terms of God, because abuse is no bueno.
It also calls a bit into the um, hypocrisy we sort of mentioned at the start and we were talking about slightly before the show, in that there's recently been a lot of scandals around the Pope and allowing remarried women to partake in communion again. Yet here we have plenty of people covering up for, and even still, like this whole George Pell thing, even though I personally think he's just kind of become a scapegoat. The
Do you want
fact
to go
that
into explain that a bit, Jesse, for people who aren't familiar with who Pell is?
he was some high-ranking archbishop in Australia. I don't know the full specifics, and he fled to Rome basically
He
to
was
avoid the commission.
Yeah, he was the face of the Catholic Church in Australia.
Yeah, and it's pretty unclear how much he actually had to do with anything and so forth. But the fact is, he fled to Rome and has been able to avoid all of it. Um,
Mm.
where
And
currently
even
you
if he
have
didn't abuse
bishops
anyone
up in
himself.
arms everywhere because remarried women can now become part of the church and community and receive communion, which is pretty big to the Catholics. Like they believe that's necessary for salvation. As Protestants, we don't. It's just a symbol of what Jesus has done for us.
Yeah,
But
and
Just
believe.
they care
random
less
aside
about
question.
the they care less about the people giving communion than they do the single women, the remarried women taking it.
Just random a question on that note. Is it just remarried women and not remarried men? Is the distinction is made that women were barred from taking communion, but men weren't if they remarried?
I'd assume it's both, but I'm not sure. The stuff I've all heard about is women because that makes for a better story,
Hmm.
and that's probably the majority, but I don't know.
Um, I guess back to the church and how it. You mentioned that an offender might just be shuttled off to a more remote church rather than it being brought to light what they did. What sort of do you know of what sort of hierarchy or structure exists in the church? Is there a way to adequately deal with things? For example, if you're in a big business and they've got like I guess this is an analogy, but they have a HR department, and you can take stuff there, and it gets sorted out, and there's a structure and there's rules and regulations in place to sort it out. Is there anything equivalent in the church, or is it just your peers have to decide whether to um, disown you or not and make it public what you've done and possibly report you to authorities like the police?
Most of it's done by your higher ups or close in rank within the church. Like I don't know fully about the Catholic Church, but they have a more rigid power structure than ones I'm familiar with, so it should be even easier. But basically, reports would come to light. They'd eventually reach your superiors, um, who would then question that, and then once it gets there, they would make decisions about what to do. Common one would be, well, the most common would be to lose your status as a pastor or priest. Um, like with Protestant churches, we see a fair bit of this. Like recently, the big profile ones was around Mars Hill with their lead pastor resigning over not playing well with others, to put it lightly. And there's been other ones around adultery and various things. But then you've got excommunication next, which is probably more specifically Catholic, though other churches do it, where you just outright, you're basically no longer welcome in the church or in the community for a time until you've realized what you've done, how it's wrong, and sort of fixed it.
Mm.
And then there's, of course, legal authority. Part of the problem is that the separation of church and state has sort of allowed that to go a little like it's a good thing, but it also means that the church can sit outside things like mandatory reporting and various other things when a lot of the time it shouldn't be.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's ridiculous. That is, and the thing that gets me with that is, why would we want to sit outside mandatory reporting? You know? If send my kid to school, and something happens there that needs to be reported to the authorities, and why would I be okay with that same thing not being reported to the authorities if it happened in a church context? For the sake, it's not about even so much what's happened to my kids, so much as it's about what about everybody else's kids. You know, the reason why it's important to, you know, stop people from doing this is not for this as much for the sake of the people who they've already victimized, although it certainly is for their sake. There's also the prevention of harm to other people. You know, if someone's known to be abusing people, then take them out of that role and get them out of the place and let all the people know who need to know, because having the freedom to just sweep it under the rug means more people are going to get hurt.
Like, I think the main reason that actually exists is around confession, and that um, historically that's something that should have been, like, you may hear things there and the church would try and deal with them internally or give people a chance for repentance and so forth without immediately making it, else you would have people committing crimes and not confessing them, which in Catholic and Anglican point of view and stuff is basically a sentence to hell straight up just because they can't. But whether that's
So it would be better for
even a
someone to
good
get
thing.
away with a crime than to not have the opportunity to confess it to a priest. Come on. How can we expect anybody to take us seriously as Christians if we're putting forward these arguments for why we should be exempt from the same laws everyone else has to follow?
Yeah, I'm not defending it. I'm just
I
saying
mean,
that's probably where it comes
like,
from.
like if I'm talking to a psychologist or I'm talking to a counselor or someone like that, and I admit to doing something that's against the law, they have to report that to the police. That's the point at which confidentiality ends, you know? If I admit to doing something that's distasteful, but that isn't illegal, that's fine. That stays between us, and I can feel comfortable getting that off my chest. And we go on about my relation, about our thing with my relationship with that person is not affected by the stuff that I've shared with them. Just doesn't go beyond that. But if I say, oh, I committed a crime the other day, well, that has to be reported, because if it's not reported, then I can go off and commit another crime, and then the person who knew that I was a criminal is hated because they could have prevented that from happening. How does it suddenly become okay because might not feel comfortable sharing that stuff if they know that we pass it on? Yeah, but if people share that stuff and you don't pass it on and someone gets hurt because you didn't pass it on, what are you going to do? What is worse? To have someone not share it in the first place, or to have someone crimes with someone else knowing that they intend to?
Yeah, I think a big part of problems with both our legal system and church systems is um, we place way too much emphasis on the rights of the perpetrator and not the victim. Like, sure, you need a bit of both, but often the rights of the perpetrator just get in the way of looking out for the rights of those who are affected by the crime, or ones who will be affected by the crime when they reoffend.
Still have to have innocent until proven guilty, because false positive is a
Yeah,
pretty bad case. Like, that's really bad. Particularly considering you ruins an innocent person's life, even if they end up appealing and being innocent later.
but the flip side of that is if you don't hold them accountable at all, then you ruin a lot of innocent people's lives if they reoffend.
Well, I don't think anyone's ever suggested the extreme swap to that. Do not hold anyone accountable. Just that the reason that you can't go.
But that's the system. A system that says confidentiality and confession goes beyond what the law says. Is
some of the
saying
legal
people
system,
don't
man. I
get.
wasn't talking about confession.
But if we're considering it in the context of that, because that's the thing. If the reason why churches don't have the same reporting expectations as a secular organisation is because we need to keep confession private, then we're setting up people get hurt, and it through the rights of the person who's committed a crime, they don't have the right to, you know, It's just
I don't think confession has any legal exclusion. As if someone confesses something that has a legal implication, like
No, it does.
threats or whatever it is.
Just being
Really?
a oh, I always forget the name. Just being enrolled or whatever the term is as a pastor means you do not have mandatory reporting apply to you.
Really? I did not know that.
yep, yep.
Huh. Actually, honestly, I didn't know that. I thought that if something has legal implications, you had to, or person at risk of harm, that you had to report it. There you go. Did not know that.
No. Anyone else? but what goes on between you and your pastor? It's all G.
Wow.
It's all, yeah.
Is that just? I mean, there's many other countries, but is that specifically an Australian thing, or is that a trend worldwide that, say, pastors or people like them are immune to such laws?
I don't know beyond Australia. I just know that's the case in Australia. Given that
Has there been
church laws are pretty
Sorry.
similar around the world, I'd imagine it likely is.
Has there been any attempt to, especially in light of the Royal Commission, uh, remedy that fact, or is the legal system more complicated in that to apply it, to get to that level of applying it to pastors, you'd have to change how religious organizations are viewed legally to begin with?
I've got no idea. It's worth noting that just because they don't have mandatory reporting, most still will.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't have to. And I'm not sure if we actually even have mandatory reporting for everyone. I think it's just certain positions such as volunteers, teachers, basically anyone in a career. But if you're just a civilian, I don't know if you have mandatory reporting placed on you.
You know, that's reasonable. As in, if my mate comes over and tells me he just robbed a store, I don't have to report that. But if I am in a position where I'm officially supporting this person, they come and tell me I robbed a store, I have to report that because of my position, my relationship with that person. They've admitted that to me, then I'm well passing it on.
Oh, okay. In Australia, this seems to vary from state to state, which I guess makes it complicated. For example, the ACT has a huge list, whereas in Northern Territory, it just seems that any person is mandated to report, as best I can tell. It might be worth, Jesse, for you to share some of these links with the when you put this up.
Are they? Yeah, I can locate them later.
Yeah, well, yeah, they should be there. But they would, I mean, this is way more than I can, or any of us can summarize in verbal form. But the government website, so that at least covers it as far as Australia is concerned.
Just curious. I'm trying to read this thing. Mandatory reporting. So, correct if I'm wrong. I'm not spelling this. If you receive information that a child's in danger and you don't report it, that mean you can get prosecuted? As a layperson, I'm not just as a random person on the street. That is. I'm not talking about religious.
mean,
Apparently it's different on a state by state basis, but my understanding is that in Queensland that's not the case, but you're wrong.
Okay, so in that sense, if it's not a requirement like of random people or civilians, then that's one thing that's similar to clergy. I'm just trying to work out like what special things clergy have compared to random civilians.
But
That
it's
basically
not
any other
compared to
official
random civilians
position
though. It's
has
yeah.
mandatory
If you're
reporting. If
you're a
you work with
counselor, you're a
children in any
psychologist, you're
capacity,
a chaplain, you're a worker,
Right,
you have to.
even like
I see.
childcare workers and teachers, like basically anything else other than a random civilian. And
I
I'd
mean, then there's
imagine,
training associated with it as well when you initially, especially, and accreditation, I guess, for lack of a better term, at least
yeah,
in Queensland, with say the blue card that lets you work with children.
I think the blue card actually came in at like the start of all this Royal Commission stuff. Could be wrong,
Yeah,
but they were pretty
it's
around the
been around
same
for a
time.
while. I got my blue card in 2010, as soon as I turned 18. Admittedly, I actually got really easy
Yeah,
because I was part of a church.
it well predates the Royal Commission. I remember blue cards coming in back in like 2003, maybe earlier.
Fair enough, I
So I
was wrong
remember
then.
all the Sunday school teachers in my church had to get them way back then. It's been a thing for a while, but it not in response to the Royal Commission, but in response to more and more allegations of abuse. People realised we need to have systems in place to protect.
Alright, so let's move specifically onto churches for now, and got an article here, I'll share it with the link as well, but I'll also read out a bunch of it at the moment, on things that make churches more vulnerable to predators, and then we might discuss some things that we can actually do about that in light of all that. So, 6 reasons why sexual predators target churches. First one is Christians are naive. Some sexual offenders stated outright, they go after churches because Christians tend to be naive. An assaulter says, oh wait, I should source first. This is from Tim Challies. It's an article he's got online, and as I said, link will be in the description. Back to the thing. An assaulter says, if children can be silenced and the average person is easy to fool, many offenders report that religious people are even easier to fool than most people. Raju says, Christians are, generally speaking, trusting folks. Child abusers recognize this fact and want to take full advantage of it. He quotes a former prosecutor who lays it out. For a variety of reasons, we naively tend to automatically lower our guard when we are amongst professing Christians. This same naivete is why offenders flock to the faith community. No other environment provides them such quick and easy access to children without fear of raising concerns. And yeah, I think there's a fair bit of truth to that, especially with our, like, rightly so, some of it, our focus on it doesn't really matter what you've done, it's who you are now, it's what God can do in you. Seek forgiveness, we're all sinners, and just general trust because we're among Christians who are striving to a higher standard.
Maybe, but here's the thing. Like, even in a church context, in the churches I've been in at least, they've had policies that are things along the lines of, if there's any suspicion of something may have gone on, then all right, you've repented of that. We're going to not hold that against you forever. We're not going to never let you rejoin fellowship with us. Also, we're not going to put you in charge of our kids' church ministry or whatever it happens to be, because that would just be a do. Maybe it's a more recent thing, but it certainly seems like in all the churches that I've been involved with, at least recently, they've been very mindful of the fact that this is a concern and had strong policies in place to protect people. But clearly, that's not been so much a thing in the past in certain churches and in.
Yeah, and like I know some protocols, like generally, um, like a lot of churches, especially ones with a lot of kids, just won't take pedophiles. It's just too risky, and you never know why they're actually there. Those that do will often make them sign some sort of forms, I think around like meeting up regularly, having more stringent watch put on them, that sort of thing, to keep them in track. And often these people just avoid that and try and hop church to church. So if you are a church leader or something, look out for stuff like that and why they do that. Also, the other thing is, and we've had this happen at our church, like you have people come who've been in prison from time to time, and like that's a good thing. But what we do do is we try and like find out why they were in there. It's not so much to find out what they did; it's more to make sure that we know if they're child predators, etc. Um, so that's what that's about. If you're doing there, it's not so. It's so that we can make sure to protect the other people who are there as well, to check up on that and be more careful with things like what roles we give to people and so forth. All right, number 2. Christians are ignorant of the problem. Christians are not only naive, but also ignorant. Ignorant of the problem of abuse and the extent of the problem within faith communities. Many Christians consider it unlikely or impossible that abuse could happen within their church, so they fail to take adequate measures. They ignore warnings and they disregard reports. Reju says, many Christians don't know how to distinguish likability and trustworthiness. They confuse the two categories, assuming that if someone is courteous and nice, they must also be trustworthy. Moreover, some Christians behave as though the problem doesn't exist, and some look with suspicion on reports of abuse. They believe children are lying and are more prone to take an adult's word. Sexual predators know that these dynamics operate in churches, and they know they can get away with a lot on account of it. I feel like this isn't just true of churches, this is just general public, from my experience and reports I've heard
But
and stuff like that.
Also, I think with that, again, may have been true in the past, but in the present day, you'd have to be a special kind of ignorant to miss, especially in light of things that have recently come to light. No church anywhere in the country right now is going, oh no, we don't need to be worried about that. That's not a real problem anywhere.
Yeah. So my home church has had and they actually do it regularly each year, or a few times a year, workshops and things on ensuring that people are vigilant and on all of that, full background checks and everything. Like, and if anything comes up, regardless if they've repented and all that, no positions of leadership involving children. Zero. Can't risk that.
But again, it's obviously it has been a concern in the past, a
Oh,
real issue
huge.
in the past, and is something that we need to be mindful of always. But it's certainly that lack of awareness is much less of a thing today. Unfortunately, the reason why it's less of a thing today seems to be less because of we've realized that we've got a problem and we want to do something about it, and more like people outside of the church are going, you guys need to stop, you know, this problem that you've got. The fact that this is something that other people have picked up on, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think a lot
Embarrassing
of
is the wrong
this,
word.
I think a lot of this stuff is like this is the same problems that plague persecution for child abuse or any sexual abuse. Like people think, oh, that guy's likable, he can't have done this stuff. Let's put all the suspicion on the victim, who often, because of the abuse,
Yeah.
is of more questionable life choices, to put it easily, um,
No.
and various things, or they're just outright suspected because they don't want to believe it's the other guy.
There's also the
Um,
power dynamic involved, which is a problem. Like if you've got someone without so much power, claiming something against someone with power, that dynamic hurts the chances of a victim without power claiming something successfully.
yeah. All right, number 3. Churches offer access to children. Perhaps most simply of all, churches offer access, and often very easy access, to children. They're not always the case, as we've been discussing here with the various structures our churches have in place. Ray Juice says this well: because churches are always looking for help with children's ministry, and are often facing shortages of volunteers, sexual offenders know that churches are desperate. In children's ministry, volunteers are often late, some cancel at the last minute, when they had promised to volunteer, others don't even bother showing up for their service. So when a courteous, kind, reliable man walks in and offers to help, who's going to turn him down? No other organization provides such quick and easy access to children. Sexual predators know this, so they can show up at churches, eager to make themselves known and ready to serve. And this stuff is probably still all true. We still probably are the easiest thing to volunteer in to get access to children. Like, not a lot of other volunteer organizations have a lot to do with children, and those that do often have even more steps in place than Christians do. So something we definitely need to be mindful of.
Well, that's the big thing is, despite all of our protocols and things in our church that we're part of, that is absolutely no reason to be complacent. Because anything, even people that we think are right, we aren't perfect in our judgments of people. We can easily mess that up.
Well, especially
And
those we're closest to as well.
exactly, exactly.
All right, next point. Many Christians abuse authority. Many in brackets. Sometimes authority is put in the hands of evil individuals who then abuse that authority by taking advantage of others. Christians are rightly taught to submit to authority, but not always warned that there are situations in which authority can and must be defied. Child abusers will use positions of spiritual authority to gain access to children and abuse them. Ask yourself,
Yeah.
if a pastor or priest walks into a room, what's your normal disposition? Most of us have a degree of caution around strangers until we've gotten to know them and built a trusting relationship. But pastors and priests are often afforded trust just because of their position as clergy. This, of course, has been proven again and again by sickening news headlines. And perhaps rightly so, this probably isn't so much of the case anymore.
Oh, I think that's, of all of the ones that have been mentioned, that for me is the biggest one, because
I'm talking more specifically about priests, some of the more trusted individuals. There's still degrees of
yeah,
truth to
maybe
that,
not
though.
by society, the wider society, but everyone in the church respects the flip out of the pastor, respects the flip out of the priest. They're still the person that anyone inside of the church looking to for guidance, expecting in many cases an unrealistic standard of perfection from sort of thing. We put crazy high expectations, church leaders, which is itself a problem, a whole bunch of ways that don't even relate to this. But abuse of power is a huge concern.
Oh yeah, for
Church
sure.
and people's willingness to just assume the best of anyone who happens to be in leadership. Oh, they did 4 years in Bible college. We we'll let you do whatever you want. by and large, we tend to be trusting of people, which was one of the points that was raised earlier on. And we'll keep our guard up for old mate who just walked in last week and wants to run the kids ministry. But when it's the minister who's been doing the job for the last 10 years, of course, he's been here longer than most of us. He's safe. We'll let him do his thing. And if anyone raises allegations against him, it couldn't have been him. He's a man of God, and he's been doing a good job. And we like having him around here. No, I think that's the biggest by far.
Yeah. It's, I guess, I've always grown up or wanting to trust the pastor. And thankfully, at least the situation I've been in, that's been a valid thing to do. Thankfully. Um, so I can understand at least, well, to a limited extent, I can understand how like shocking it would be to have the person you trust, um, you know, do horrible things to people, even if it wasn't to you. Just even to other people would be a horrible thing to deal with.
So what do you think are some things we can do against this as a church?
Well, if we see dodgy stuff, report it is one thing, and even if they're your mates, um, deal with it as if, as we should. Don't hide things despite having the same religion or the same friendships, which can be hard to do, but that's basically the reason why it's perpetuated so much in some churches. That's one of the things we can do.
Should
I
also
think having strong systems of accountability in place is a really important part of this. Because particularly for church leadership, making sure there are adequate support structures in place for people in those leadership roles can prevent use of power from happening, whether that comes in the form of use or whether that comes in the form of, there's a million different ways that power can be abused, but making sure that your leaders have people who they're being accountable with, because so often we put a big emphasis on accountability in the church world for your average Joe. They've got someone or two people that they're being real with and being discipled by. Take it all the way up to the top, and your pastor or whoever, do they have someone who they're to? Because in a lot of places, that's not the system they have. Everyone else has a support system in place except for the pastor or the priest or whoever who just kind of wings it. And the outcome of that is there's no accountability, there's no transparency for the people at the very top, and it can be easy for bad things to go unchecked for a lot longer than if there's people in place. It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to everyone, but the stronger your accountability systems are, the stronger, more transparency you've got, the more support you've got for people all the way up to the top, the better chance you have of protecting a lot more people.
I mean, I think it was already mentioned, but you need a way that victims can report things and be believed, like an impartial or third party that can exist that you can report to, that's not going to immediately defer back to the pastor or defer back to the church leadership that might have let this happen to begin with. The church leadership / other organization that this happened with.
And another pretty easy thing to do is to just have a bunch of consistent rules and have everyone need to stick to them regardless of rank and position. Stuff like don't be alone with a child, use different bathrooms between children and adults, stuff like that. Like, same sort of idea behind us having a code of laws and constitution to protect against power abuses in society. Do similar things with your church. Right. Churches can be manipulated. Churches offer
Anything with people in it.
yeah. Churches offer religious roles or language that abusers can manipulate to accomplish their ugly purposes. Child abusers often use church-based roles in order to provide rationale and cover for their abuse. An offender may take on a role like Sunday school teacher, nursery worker, youth minister, camp supervisor, or pastor in order to gain the position he or she needs to access children. He may also use religious language to confuse a child's understanding of God, sin, or faith. An offender might tell a child that he is loving the child, when in fact he is abusing him. The child might have a sense that he is sinning in some way, especially if he hears from his parents or the church that sex outside of marriage is sin. But when a Sunday school teacher or pastor or priest tells him something like, "God told me to do this, so you must obey me," or "this is not sin but love," the child will not only be confused but will be inclined not to second guess a religious authority figure. Religious roles and language can provide all the cover an abuser needs.
So one other thing that potentially is either in parenting or even from responsible religious leaders is actually talking about, no one will ever actually have the talk at age appropriate levels of sexual safety. So it's basically, regardless of who they are and where they are, children will hopefully be less likely to assume the best in even religious leaders in that sense. You know what I mean? Like they won't let their guard down, hopefully. Not that kids have much of a guard, unfortunately. There might be
I
some
mean,
sort of parenting thing there.
so as someone from the outside, how pedestal is the wrong word, but like how much is the leader of a church looked upon as being not so much infallible, but as being a better guide of things than anyone else in the church? Like if they're considered to have good moral judgment to begin with, does that make it less likely that others question them, or more likely that, as you mentioned, um, gives them greater ability to manipulate?
Well, at least for adults, everything, and hopefully for children as well, but at least for adults, everything that clergy says should be scripturally accurate or tested against scripture and found to be true. Um, some things obviously would not fall under that category that some do. So,
The answer to this will vary a lot depending on denomination we're talking about. So
Yeah.
a lot of us here are Protestants, and probably the main distinctive of that is that rather than getting authority from human figures and tradition, tradition is probably the more accurate one there. We get it from reading and interpreting the Bible. Like that interpretation is still trusted more when it comes from an authority figure, someone who's trained in it, as it should. But it's a lot more consensus based, and people will check things ideally against what they can read for themselves in the Bible with easy access to it and so forth. Whereas Catholic and High Anglican and that is a lot more focused on church tradition, church documents, and what their leaders say, like all the way up to very highly exalted leaders such as the Pope. So they're a lot more vulnerable to this sort of thing because a lot of people in there just don't know the scriptures themselves, or don't even have it in languages that they can read, as was historically the case. And they're told not to trust their own interpretation, but to go with whatever the church has interpreted through the ages, or whatever the pope or bishop or just their priest says at the time, which must also agree with their higher ups.
So is that to say that the average Protestant, say, has a greater familiarity with the Bible because they're encouraged to interpret it on their own and reach a consensus with the group more than, say, the average Catholic does? Or is that a misreading of the what you just said?
That would be fair. Like, it's a bit of a generality. We have to be careful to not think that Catholics are ignorant of their Bible
Oh,
or that
of
their
course.
leaders aren't. But things like Protestants will meet weekly for a Bible study, for example, where everyone in church is encouraged to come, and it's basically sit around in a group and ask questions and have discussions around the Bible. Whereas I think that is less common in Catholic situations, though not unheard of, and especially among young people, I think there's a lot more of that now.
Hmm.
Like these days, a lot of lines are starting to blur between the two, but still not all of them. But generally, yes, a Protestant will have a better understanding of the Bible than a Catholic will.
A greater knowledge of the Bible, maybe.
Yeah.
Whether that equates to a better understanding, I'd be more familiar with it.
And contrary, though, a Catholic might have a better understanding of doctrine than a Bible, so of church understandings and interpretations of various passages. They
Yep.
may not know the passages or that themselves, but they'll probably understand the ideas better than your average Protestant.
Hmm.
And I think in the case of this point we're discussing at the moment, that's part of our strongest defense against um, abusers manipulating knowledge like this, and for children is to have um, strong teaching on what Scripture says, maybe even have specific lessons on what Scripture says about abuse and so forth. Like, I don't do kids' church and the sort of stuff, I'm no good at, so I don't fully know what you would do, but lessons like that might be a good idea. Hey, this is something that could happen, be careful, and situations like this, you're not the one doing anything wrong, they are, that sort of idea.
Yep.
Just make sure we are teaching so that they know the right things to counter these manipulations they might face. And this is also, we won't get into this too much here, but this same sort of thing has been used um, to justify abuse of women and keep them silent and just have to accept it and various things like that. So this is a problem that goes beyond just child abuse. But we'll
Yeah.
discuss that in another time when we have more women.
So, I mean, so at church I go to, I am quite involved in life groups, and in life group it means we actually have just potential situations, even hypothetical situations where, even not necessarily even things occur, but even things could be at risk of occurring. So, one example is what happens if I'm a male guy. The last person left to leave is female. What happens then? And their car breaks down. Just this hypothetical situation, just thinking through it. And people can be 17 in the groups as well. So potentially underage. Like, so this is, I know it's hypothetical, but we have to think about it. What do we do? And sometimes thinking through these things and thinking about the practicalities of removing any chance of anything going wrong is actually quite a helpful exercise. Here's what the different hypotheticals to think about. Without going crazy into thousands of them, just
For what it's
doing the
worth,
like
like I
practical
don't think we
ones
have a
is really helpful.
particularly lengthy discussion on that topic. It wouldn't take too long for us to all agree on not molest them as being the correct way of dealing with that. But well, hopefully it wouldn't.
No,
Well, it's more about how to avoid situations that may come up that allow for abuse.
yeah.
Hmm.
So
So
don't
sometimes one
leave
principle
just
things.
two people
Yeah,
left, for example.
yeah, and I mean, yes, we can probably all trust ourselves and each other, but that comes to that complacency thing, which is such a big risk when talking about the church and abuse and everything like that, particularly with Royal Commission on, even if there wasn't abuse happening, if there was accusation of it, it could still mess us up. Because rightly so, there's a big emphasis on it, on catching and making sure it stops.
I mean, admittedly, that's probably a good thing that they're more likely to believe the victim at the moment than the accuser. But, like, false reports do happen. That sort of has to be said. But far more things are called false reports or not prosecuted because of suspicion than are actually false reports.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the statistics on sexual assault suggest that the majority, in fact, the overwhelming majority, of cases of sexual assault go unreported.
yeah, we were looking at stats for that earlier. It's
Game or whatever.
16% reporting rate, and of that, I think
Yeah.
the actual conviction rate is 5 to 10%, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
It's really appalling. And this is of a population and where somewhere around 16% of the population will be raped at some point in their life as kids or as adults. And 1% of that is male, so that's not a thing that never happens either.
Mm.
Right, final point. Churches offer cheap grace. Sometimes abusers are caught, but even then they may get away with their crimes. Abusers count on receiving cheap grace. Grace that comes far too freely and with far too little cost. I've messed up my recording here. Well, not the recording, but anyway, here, random thing. Let's get back to reading. Abusers are not dumb. They know that if they cry, offer words of contrition, and promise never to do it again, they are very likely to not have to face significant consequences. Pastors and churches are very forgiving. They are quick to apply the gospel, and very, very slow to apply the consequences that come from the law. An offender will weep and admit he was wrong and promise never to do anything like that again, and the church may respond by determining that they will let it go this once. But when they do that, they simply allow the offender to go right back to his behavior and allow the child to remain a victim. In the face of all this, it is no wonder that the Bible calls us to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. But while all of these dangers are true, and while abusers are deliberate in targeting churches, this does not mean that we are left defenseless. And then he goes on to talk about a book by Reiju, On Guard, if you're interested. I don't know Reiju's first name. R-E-J-U.
It was at the top of the article,
Cool.
I believe. Deepak Reju.
Yep. Deepak, D-E-E-P-A-K. I'll just
Yeah.
check the link I'll post.
The book on guard, Reju.
So, cheap grace. What do we think?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Very cheap.
And it's crazy, you know, you think about it, like there are some cases where someone will do something, not a severe thing. Case like that, forgiveness is an appropriate course. So maybe you don't take it out on them as harshly as you could have done. You know, what they took $5 out of the collection plate. Do that again. I'm sorry, I won't do that. All right. But like sexual assault is like that is far towards the you throw the book at that person of the spectrum of, you know, as you
I think
can possibly get.
The Christian response to sexual assault in the church is to report them to the secular authorities, being police. That is actually the Christian response.
They
Because
do not wield the
it's a
sword in
crime.
vain.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think just because it's within this community group means that the secular authorities that put in power by God, as Scripture says, are invalid. That's at least a legit thing to go to, or whatever authorities that may be contacted.
And even in the case of the punishment, like what I
Yeah.
just quoted there,
Well,
like they do not wield the sword in vain, talking specifically of Roman authorities that would likely execute, because we are a long way from prisons being a viable option. And even now, if you
well
think,
that.
oh well, they need forgiveness, they need help, they might not get these things if we report them, but we can do that. No, they need to.
Part
I
of the
mean, you're
forgiving
probably
process.
less equipped to do that than the authorities, for one. You're kind of kidding yourself if you think you are. And two, they still need to face justice. A God is a God of justice and mercy, not one or the other. And we have to keep that in mind, especially when there is also a victim that needs your help far more.
I mean, part of the forgiveness thing is the restoration thing, which involves going through whatever punishments and consequences, and for that abuse, particularly prevent reoccurrence. So that is legit. I mean, the other thing is, even with secular punishments involved, there still will be the, despite maybe refusing repentance, the ability to take part in children's programs or any other caring programs as a leader, because that's just not going to be helpful for any party.
Right. So we discussed a bit of this earlier, so we don't need to cover it too much about how the Catholics shuffling people around was not great. Um, but also, just some final thoughts. One thing that we have to be aware of, and that's also come out recently, I don't know if it was through this or just through other studies, is that you can't always trust children with other children either, more specifically teenagers, because one, all abusers were also teenagers at some point, but two, especially if you're working in communities that have high rates of abuse and so forth, kids tend to act out what has been done to them. And it's like sometimes it's naive misunderstanding, but it's not that way to the victim. So you have to be careful when you're setting laws and policies and other things to not think, oh, it's just two children together, they're fine. That also needs a bit of scrutiny and care put over that, bit of oversight. Anyone got any other things to add?
No, that about covers it. For me anyway, this isn't my most reverse topic, although I'm definitely trying to be aware of it because it's one of those vigilance things you really got to be on top of. Um, yeah, that about covers it for me.
I mean, I think we had a reasonable discussion. I mean, I guess I asked a few questions as an outsider, but for most of it was content to uh, listen and see how you guys discussed it.
All right. We'll see you all next time. Things have been pretty
Will
busy
do.
lately,
Sounds
so
good.
it's could be a couple of weeks again, but we'll see. But see you all when we see you.
Catch you all later.